What's up? How y'all doing? It's Jared. This is a Brous Blades B3 Balisong. I don't think this knife deserves the reputation that it has as far as being the absolute worst flipper on the market, right? This thing has had a lot of crap talked on it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that it's good because it's realistically not. I mean, it's not an excellent flipper. However, that does not mean that it's bad. It's not a bad flipper. It's just got problems. There's a problems all through this thing is in the for the actual sport of flipping, for the actual, art of manipulation, the sport of flipping a balisong, whatever you want to say, this thing has got problems, right? But it's not a bad knife. It actually does flip. It's balanced very well for, what the construction materials that it's made out of. It's almost pure stainless steel. I don't think there's anything in this but stainless steel besides the actual washers and the bushings themselves, but I'll get into that system in a minute because if you're familiar, this thing runs on washers. This one here does not actually run on washers, but it's still, I can do things with it. You know what I mean? I can flip this thing around. I can still do a lot of the things that I can do with a lot of other Balisongs. I can still do with this thing, It's got problems and it's not comfortable and it pinches me, especially in this aspect here. Anytime that I'm doing any sort of ricochet, just the design of this, I'll get further down into it on the table there, but just the overall design is it's very pinchy and it has the tendency to stab you with the tang of the blade, which is just an interesting thing in itself. And so it's not the absolute best out there, but it's not as bad as a lot of the portrayal has kind of tried to make it. You know what I mean? There's this stigma out there that this thing is just the absolute worst knife in the world, and really that's not the case. It's you're paying, I mean, if you can get this thing for less than $200, which is the going rate right now for this model here, you can kind of still get this kind of yellow-esque and black bladed model on a few different websites for sub $200. And for that price, for what you're getting, the build, the quality, the construction of the materials, and just the capability of an overall use knife. Not necessarily a Balisong flipper. Not something that's you're going to manipulate all the time, that you're just going to constantly be doing tricks with. It's not oriented towards that. I would never suggest somebody buy this if they're in the market for an alpha beast. They're in the market for, something because they're getting into the sport and the dedication of flipping. That is not what this knife is for. However, this knife still has a place in the market. It is definitely well constructed. You're getting what you pay for, especially now that they're just trying to get rid of these things. Since the black cell came in, Brous Blades is doing their second iteration. It looks like it has a little bit more oriented towards the actual sport of flipping itself. This thing really just kind of doesn't. But I mean, you can see I'm not a good flipper, but I mean, I can do things with this. I can still manipulate it in a lot of the ways that I can do all of my other knives. It's just uncomfortable. It kind of hurts sometimes, and I'll stab myself and cut myself in ways with this knife that I just wouldn't with any other knife. And so it's not optimal, I don't want to portray that it is, but at the same time, it's not nearly as bad as a lot of the market kind of suggests that it is. Get down onto the table. Alright, so really what are the problems with this thing? It comes down to, it's just design aspects, right? Because there's jimping on the back of this, right? Which is kind of cool. It's not very functional. It's not extremely rounded there. Hold on one second, actually. Sorry about that. Forgot to turn my lights on. But you can see, I mean, it is rounded off a little bit, so it's not the most functional jimping, and it's the same thing on the scales themselves here, the frame of the knife. It's got a little bit of jimping, which does work for a little bit of traction. I mean, I can feel it a little bit. It's not really going to do anything as far as any sort of penetrating motion. If your hand is going to slip up already, that jimping is not really going to help you. But what it does
is when you're spinning around. You know what I mean? When this knife is actually moving around your finger in this aspect here, or it's just coming down in a ricochet or a closure, anytime my skin gets in between those two lumps, because you can see it there, it's kind of working like a little hacksaw blade actually coming down and kind of chopping down. You can just see the way that those lumps, or those little, the jimping actually works together, and that will pinch me, and it's not a bad pinch. It's not a pinch that's going to cut me. It's not something that's it's not a bad pinch. If you know anything about getting pinched by a Balisong, it's not that bad, but it's consistent. It happens all of the time, and it'll eventually just wear in, and you'll get this red spot right there on your finger if you're flipping this thing too long, and that's just uncomfortable. That's not very good. As well as the tang of this blade. I actually like this blade shape for as radical as it is. I don't normally like this kind of radical recurve-esque shape. I wouldn't want this blade shape on a folder, but it kind of works for me on a Balisong. I do like the aesthetics of this, just this recurve, drop point, Tonto-esque kind of thing. But the problem with it is this little area here, because you can see the width of this. Look at how wide that is here. This is the widest section of this entire blade, is right there at the base of that tang. And there's this little protrusion, this little sharp bit sticking off the end there, which is nice because they've actually done the plunge grind correctly. You can see that there. For the blade grind itself, it is ground very nicely, especially for a recurve. Nailing a plunge grind on a recurve isn't easy to do, that's a good grind right there, and it's a good design, but what it leads to is constantly being cut just a tiny bit, there's just that little tiny bit of contact that'll just ting, 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 and it'll cut you a little bit. You'll get little dings and little dents, and it's all just from that little bit sticking off right there. And it's something you can get used to. Once I flip this knife for a longer period of time, that's no longer an issue because I get used to it. But every time I flip something else and then come back to this knife, that winds up stabbing me a couple times. It really does. And so it's not the best shape in the tang area, the base of this blade for contact with your hands. Obviously on the cutting edge side of it there, but it's got some problems as far as comfort in flipping, but overall comfort in hand, this thing actually feels really good. I like the way that it feels in hand because it is relatively thin again, which is a negative for flipping. I'll address that in a minute, but the way the curvature of this handle is here, you can see it's just got a gentle curvature on both of these handles. The separation of how far they are apart. I've got a freaking ant running on me right now. Where the hell did you come from? No, whatever. But it does actually feel really good in my hand. This is something that I wouldn't mind doing a little bit of harder work with. If you got to cut up a whole bunch of stuff, if you're actually going to be using a Balisong, this thing is comfortable in the hand. It's not the best for any stoppage protection as far as penetrating. If you're going to be stabbing this into a harder material, you probably are. It's not going to stop you completely, but that little bit of swell right there does offer a good amount of grip as well as just a large amount of comfort. And so this thing feels good in my hand. I do actually like using this knife for a work knife, actually being able to carry this thing around. I do like that. And then as well, if I can pull this thing actually off my hip, because I've been carrying this knife, actually been carrying this one around with me today, and it fits directly. Pulled this thing off my hip. This is the sheath for the Max Ace Pelican, and you can see it slides up in there and it almost latches in. I really like the way that works. This is what I've been carrying around the last couple days just because I'm kind of getting ready for this review, but I do like this thing as a work knife. It's a good overall use knife. It's just not, it doesn't excel at flipping. It doesn't excel at the actual sport of flipping. It comes with a latch now. The latch, all right, hold on. All right, this is actually the way that it comes stock here, okay? This latch is a really cool idea. I like the idea of it. It's cool the way that it's got a little detent ball. If you're not familiar with it, it's got a little detent ball right there. It kind of pops up and you can pop it into place and it holds your latch in there. So it's a traditional T-latch that holds itself in place and it doesn't rattle around. It doesn't get in the way when you're actually flipping this thing around, right? But what this thing does, right? So when you're actually using this thing, if I'm carrying this thing in my pocket, I'll get into the pocket clip in a minute. If I'm carrying this thing in my pocket like this, I pull it out and I actually just disengage that latch, okay? And so now I've just done that. Okay, if I'm in a defensive scenario, whatever, if I'm just trying to get this done quickly, especially if this is a defensive scenario, if I'm going to be actually getting into a fight with this thing, again, it's probably never going to happen, but whatever. This latch is now just right here, okay? It requires 2 steps to actually get it into that detent, because I have to undo the latch and then pop it into the detent to make sure that it is securely out of the way, right? And then I can actually open the knife and maneuver it, because if I don't do that, there's no latch gate. And this thing will come down and just make straight contact and smack into the end of my blade. And so that's not as much of a worry in like a defensive scenario, but then your latch is still flipping around. And so you actually do have to use those 2 motions to get this thing up and out of the way. And a latch is a negative to a lot of people in using in Balisong because it's that extra step. Just having to undo it in itself, just having to actually flip this thing open and take that time and that effort is a negative for a lot of people. And so adding an extra step to where you have to snap it into that little detent to actually get it to function and not go anywhere, and then the fact that it doesn't actually have a latch gate, this just isn't done very well. It's a cool idea. I like the idea. It's showing ingenuity, but it's just not good. It's just really not a good idea for this type of knife. For this type of Balisong, you know what I mean? It's cool, but it doesn't work. It's just too much of a pain. It's too much of a hassle. It's a hassle to deal with, and as well as the pocket clip on the safe handle. Why is the pocket clip on the safe handle? It's almost standard. I don't know who standardized it. It may have been Benchmade with the 51. I don't think it was. It's probably before that. But the latch is generally on the bite handle unless it's like a manila style folder. Most Balisongs, most common Balisongs nowadays will have the latch on the bite handle as well as the pocket clip on the bite handle. So choosing to put the pocket clip on the safe handle, which is the handle you're going to be doing the most of your manipulation with, right? Until you get into some intermediate tricks to more advanced tricks and actually doing tricks, you're never going to be manipulating and doing any sort of work on the bite handle. You're never actually going to have your hand on the bite handle to be doing anything, right? And so having the pocket clip on the safe handle here requires you to deal with the pocket clip, even if it is small and even if it is subdued and not very big, but you have to deal with it. So even if you're only using this knife for a work knife and you're not going to be actually flipping this thing, you have to have the pocket clip. You have to have that thing rattling around in your hand, and it's small and it is unobtrusive, but I mean it's still there. I do notice it. I don't like noticing the pocket clip when I know I'm on the safe handle of a Balisong. It just kind of bothers me. And as well, when I'm carrying a knife, if you're carrying more common, this is a 32, Benchmade 32, right? When I slip this thing actually into my pocket, if that latch comes undone, the way that this is carried in my right hand pocket, right? You can imagine it's carrying, up against the side of my pocket. So when the latch actually comes undone, the side of my pocket will hold the knife closed. You don't actually need the latch because the pocket clip itself holding the knife up against the side of your pocket will prevent that knife from actually opening, which isn't the case with this knife here. When I slip this thing into my pocket, carrying it in my right hand pocket, this pocket clip is actually what's sitting up against the side of my pocket. So if this latch actually ever does come undone, it's not necessarily as much of a concern because it's a T-latch, but if it does ever actually come undone, this thing can just fall open and it'll open up in your pocket. And so it's actually a safety negative as well as just an overall comfort negative. I don't know why that's on the safe handle. It's just an interesting design choice. There was a lot of interesting design choices that go into the manufacturing of this Balisong. The balance is absolutely great for having stainless steel handles, but they are stainless steel handles, which is an interesting thing for the modern flipping community. But look at how much material they actually removed from the inside of these handles. They are majorly skeletonized, and so that's a really good thing. But if you're familiar with this knife, right? Hold on, let me actually start breaking this thing down. If you're familiar with this, I had an issue with the blade centering. There was a serious problem with blade centering, and it just didn't. It wasn't very smooth. It wouldn't function correctly. The actual, it was the safe handle here. The blade centering was just off to the point where if I tightened the pivot down to where I could actually move the handle, actually it would float, then it was just too loose. The blade would actually collide with the inside of the handle. It just didn't work. And if I tightened up the pivot to the point where the blade would actually not, collide with the handle. It would center it enough to actually where it wouldn't collide. Then I would run into issues with it sticking, and it just was too stiff. And there's too much tension in the pivot and for it to actually operate. And so this knife was just out of the box when I bought it, really didn't run very well. I had to actually send it back into Brous Blades just to get it fixed. But with that, they took care of me. I sent it in. I sent them a question. If I can find out what freaking size this thing is. I sent them an email. They emailed me back relatively quickly. It was like 2 or 3 days. They hit me back saying, yeah, just send it in. We'll take care of it. They did. Hold on. What I'm doing right now, guys, is this is a double-sided Torx 9 pivot, right? So I've got to find, out of all my little bits here, what I did with my Torx 9 and get 2 of them and take off this scale. I don't know why, man, people use double-sided freaking pivots. Just use a D-shaped pivot. God damn it. This is... I'll come back. Give me a minute. Alright, got it. Yeah, so that was some horrible... Don't ever try to take a knife apart the way I was just trying to do there. I was frustrated with this thing. Alright, but... Okay, if you're familiar with this thing, when it came stock there, if you watch some of the YouTube videos, like the Blade HQ video, whatever it is, they're very excited about the bearing system that comes in this thing, right? The actual bearing pivot system, you can see how this the actual skeletonizing there. When I sent this thing into Brous Blades, they took out the bearing system. You can actually see this here. Let me get a paper towel. Something actually wipe this thing down with, right? They removed the bearing system entirely and put in this brass bushing. That is not a bearing. That is a straight brass bushing. It's not a bushing system as in collapsing down on the blade. It's just a bushing to, cover, to take up the space that bearing was originally there. And so I think there had to be a problem with the manufacturing of the actual bearings, of the bearings that were running in these B3s. There had to be a problem, because when I sent this thing in for warranty, they did not tell me that they were going to do this. They didn't even tell me that they did this. They just sent the knife back, and the knife was running much better than it did when I had sent it in. So yeah, whatever, I took it apart to see what they actually did, and they took the bearing system out of it and just straight replaced it with this brass bushing. But now we've got a whole lot of brass. The only piece of steel in this actual pivot system is the actual pivot itself, right? And so that's brass running on brass washers running around a steel pivot. That's a very smooth system. There's a lot of lubricated materials there, and so I'm not necessarily displeased with it, but I am kind of shocked on the fact that they just took the bearing system out of it. You know what I mean? There had to be something wrong with it. I wonder if that's one of the reasons that the B3 just didn't take off. It wasn't nearly as successful as a lot of people may have anticipated or hoped for. Was there a problem with that system? If there was, I'm not quite sure honestly what it was, because they haven't put it out there or anything, but they just straight replaced my bearing system. This is no longer running on bearings. It is a phosphorus bronze washers on a general standard pivot system. But with that, set this thing up and see my handle play, relatively minimal, and it's smooth. It runs nice, very smooth, no grit, no grime. It's definitely free floating. It carries momentum decently well. It's not the best flipper out there. The blade centering is lined up. So you tell me whether or not you think that's good warranty service. I don't know. I'm happy with it because they fixed it, but at the same time, is that good warranty service? I don't know. I'm definitely a fan, though. I can't talk crap on Brous Blades. They took care of me. And I am very curious about the next one to come out, that Black Cell. See if that one does any better. I hold this knife in the same class of knives as something like this Benchmade 32 or this Benchmade Mangus right here, the 53 Mangus. These aren't flippers. These knives aren't good at flipping, but they're good work knives. They're good use knives, because the Balisong is so much more than just the flipping. There's so much more to this overall knife design than just manipulation and just doing tricks. This is an excellent tactical knife design. It's an excellent, well, it's a decent tactical knife design. It's an excellent utility knife design. These are just good overall knives, and that's where this thing excels for me. It's not a good flipper, but as an overall use knife, I definitely like it. Brous Blades B3 Balisong. Y'all have a good one.